Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome to Word First Radio, the podcast brought to you by Word First Ministries. I am your host, Jacob O'Neill, and as always, I'm joined by my friend Cameron.
Hey.
And today, we are joined by very special guest, Mr. Karl Johan.
Woo!
That's right. Yes.
Thanks for having me.
That was hype. That was so hype. Karl Johan, thank you so much for joining us. We know all about him. He's a good friend of ours, but we're really, really, really excited to introduce him to you guys. So
It seems ridiculous that we've been here for 3 years and haven't had you on yet.
Well, I'm really grateful for being here.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
After 3 years.
Yeah.
I'm not offended at all, if that's what you're thinking.
No, I didn't mean. No, I just mean you're the obvious first person to have on and speak to the people who are listening and give us some wisdom and insight. So you're like the top of the obvious. Let's get him on the podcast list.
Well, that's kind of
Yeah, a little too obvious. I guess that's why.
That's what it was.
A little too.
Hiding in plain sight.
That's right. We got to give other people a shot. But now the time has come. Karl Johan, I mean, we've known each other since I met you. I think for the first time in 2020. I think, right?
Yeah. No, first time we came to Skepticism in Bergen.
So it was 2019.
Yeah, but I think you were only there for like a day. You came in and we said hello, and that was about it. But
Gotcha. Yeah. And the first time I remember meeting you, I guess, would be in 2020. I think when we hung out in your house. But,
that's right. The following year, your wife made us tacos.
Yeah.
Proper ones.
That's right.
That's the moment I remember too. He was saying comfort you, but it was really nice having you. That was actually really inspiring to me, having you over.
That was a pivotal, life-changing moment for me, and I think for the rest of us.
Yeah,
but that's as we get older, Karl Johan, you think about the handful of moments that sort of stick out and are like shining stars in your sky. And that's one of them in my life. It's one of like top 10.
It was a really special night. I mean, after eating proper Norwegian tacos, or just proper tacos, I guess. Hanging out with dessert afterwards, playing some worship music. I had a sore throat, and it was like I don't think you've actually ever heard me sing. No, you did at camp in Norway a few years ago.
I did.
Yeah, but I was sick. I had a sore throat and was trying to sing and play, and thankfully everybody else sang along too. But yeah, it was just a really great night. It was really awesome. But Karl, how about go ahead, just introduce yourself to the people back in California. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So going back to that night too, I sense that moment that we sat in the living room, that you guys were really tuned to worship, and not just singing worship, but living worship. And that was one of the things that was really inspiring to me too, because at that same time of life for me, I've had like this almost an epiphany, of who God is, and realized what the implications of that were to me. So I guess it was a season of life to me as well. That it was really crucial to meet guys like you. So, but anyway,
that's lovely. I love that.
That's part of who I am too, right? So
absolutely.
I'm Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and I do that in Norway because I was born here.
Yes,
but and it's really convenient to live where you're born. You guys know that.
To live where you're born. Yes,
I remember those days.
Yeah, it is really convenient. I remember. Yeah,
I would never go to a country with a language that I did not speak or understand in the first place.
Could you imagine?
That would have to be God.
Yeah.
And I can't write it off, or not yet. But I'm very comfortable here. I love living in Norway because it's my hometown. We have beautiful nature here. I grew up in the west side of Norway, but I've lived kind of all around. I married a girl called Katrina. She was my high school sweetheart. Although we didn't study in high school together, but we met at that time of life.
Yeah.
She was first time I saw her, she was singing and dancing karaoke. Don't break my heart, my achy breaky heart.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's so good.
I love that so much. I love that that's been immortalized now. It's so good.
Oh yes. So we got 3 kids.
Yeah.
We're living in Oslo. We live on the opposite side of town of you guys. So we live in the east coast. So that's where the gangsters play. But we really enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. And you actually work with the ministry called Laga that we've done a lot of ministry with. It's funny to me to say that because he actually came wearing a Laga shirt.
I love it.
T-shirt. It's so good.
I only wear Lager merch. That's my whole wardrobe now.
Tell us a little bit about Laga as an organization, because I mean they've heard us talk about it probably well, maybe not 1,000 times, but at least
1,000 times.
At most 78 times, because this is episode 79 of the podcast. So why don't you tell us about Laga? What is that?
To better understand, perhaps you have some equivalents in the States. So there's InterVarsity, which is part of the global affiliation that we also belong to. It also resembles like Campus Crusade, if that still exists. I guess it does. Yeah, that's big, right?
They call it Crew now, I think.
Crew, I mean, Crusade doesn't do that well.
No, they've had
we don't want a Crusade anymore.
No.
That's like copy my homework, but just don't make it look like you copied me. It's like Crew. Like, oh, okay.
Very subtle.
Yes, exactly.
And what we do is we do university missions, but also high school missions. So we work in the age span of 13 years old to 26 primarily. And our aim is just to make Jesus known among students. And you know, just basically we think that all students, every one of them, are loved of God, but they're also lost without Christ.
Right.
So they need to know Him, and we need to tell them. So that's our mission.
Yeah, I love that, and I think, I mean, that speaks to so much about, touches on so much of what like we've done out here. I mean, we love, like, almost the highlight of our year is coming to Skepsisuka or Skepsisukin or Skepsisvecka, however, wherever you are in the country doing it. Yeah, that's right. I totally didn't even register to me going to Bergen this year, and they call it Skepsisuken. That's different than Skepsisuka. And I was just like, oh, they say it differently. Why? And not even say it different, spell it differently. It's like, okay, all right, here we go.
We're getting there. We're figuring it out.
But anyways, that's it's a huge part of, you know, what we love doing out here. It's like our favorite. It's oftentimes the busiest week of the year for us, but it's totally worth it. I mean, we love getting in touch with students. I have there's a friend of mine we've had on the podcast, and I'm still in contact with. We still hang out regularly. Endre, if anybody who remembers the episode. But I met him at Skepsisuka, excuse me, in Oslo, like 2 years ago. And me and him are still friends. And that's where we met, on the streets. Want some coffee?
Wonderful.
Let's talk to him. So, yeah, it's a huge.
Yeah, so he was one of those
thing.
random guys that you met. Did he do a survey or something?
Not really. He wanted to. Did he do a survey? No. He came up and talked to you.
We're doing coffee and waffles.
Yeah,
coffee and waffles.
In the quad.
Love it.
Right. Yeah. And Cameron was like, "Hey, you should meet Jacob," and he met me, and now we're still friends.
He asked me something, and I was making coffee, so I couldn't be bothered. Yeah. I was like, "Go talk to this other guy."
Cameron ignored him, but he became your friend Jacob. Well,
no, I pawned him off.
He had to make coffee.
You have to delegate.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Right.
So Skeptics Week has been obviously important for us as a group of Americans who then like picked up our lives and moved here. That was our first opportunity to participate in ministry in Norway.
Yeah.
And it was very life-changing for us. So the way that it was in Bergen, then the Bergen team is always so good.
Right.
And their events are so well done and thoughtful. And so what they had done was during the days, they send Christians to these various campuses throughout the city. And then in the evenings during the week, there are lectures or debates or something of sort of general Christian interest that we invite these students to. Yeah. Right. And so sometimes they're very interesting lectures. Sometimes, I already said lectures and debates, but we end up... Talks, bringing a bunch of people in and then talking to them about the deep and the important things. But then during the day, we're also doing surveys, and we're collecting, maybe it's not sort of low resolution and perfect data, but we're collecting some data about what are students like, and what do students believe, and what's the way that the culture is going. Yeah. And so, like I said, that was an important part of our, like, we ministered here, and that was how we experienced God calling us to come and do that more permanently. But then also, like Jacob was saying, that's just one of our favorite things to get to participate in now that we're here. So we hadn't been back to Bergen for a couple of years, and we got to go back this year, which was really great.
Wow. Oh yeah, huge. Definitely a star in my sky, as Cam was talking about earlier, was Skeptics Week in Bergen in 2019. Pretty much every time I've ever done it. It's only been 3 years in Bergen because we couldn't go for a couple years, mostly because of the pandemic, and then because of money, and then finally got to go this year, which was super awesome. It was such a blessing.
So I wonder this, if you don't mind me asking a question.
Yeah.
So we have given our perspective to people who care to listen about what we think students are like. What does your typical college student believe? What's his or her worldview? Where are they coming from? How is that changing? And we have a limited perspective. I think we have a better perspective than most, but we have a limited perspective. And you, of course, are an expert in the area. And I know that that Lage does like actual proper surveying of the college students. So I wonder if you could. This is very, very broad, and you can keep it as short as you'd like. But what would you say is sort of the typical Norwegian student worldview, and what would you say is the typical sort of Christian student worldview in Norway?
So the proper research that we do is on the Christian students mostly, but then we do kind of like layman's research on the non-Christians, and perhaps I reflect even more on the non-Christians, for my own sake. And what you mentioned, the Skeptic Weeks and other kind of missions weeks that we hold, they're meant to facilitate conversations. And they're meant to luring Christians out of their bombshells. It's because Christians are hiding, and that is the number one reason why the Christian faith is not expanding. People are not coming to faith because Christians are hiding it. They don't think it's good news. So they would say on Sundays among their church friends that they perhaps even grew up with because they went from Christian school to Christian school throughout their entire lives, living in Christian ghettos. And they would really kind of hide their faith and not be bold about it. So they would say it's good news, but they don't think it by the way that they live.
Years ago, when you and I spoke, before we had ever come, you and I had a conversation, and you told me that thing that shocked me, and so I plagiarized this bit of information forever, which was that 9 in 10 Christian students in Norway was unwilling to share their faith. And you told me it wasn't, for most of them, it didn't seem to be because they felt the stuff that Americans say, like, I'm unprepared, I don't know what I talk about. It was that they don't see the good news as good news for everybody. And had the way I interpreted what you said, because I don't remember your exact words, but it was that they had basically the same sort of relativist kind of secularized mindset where it's like, this is my good news that I've chosen, and you have a duty and a right to find your own.
I think they privatized faith in many ways. And, I think that's one of our real core issues as secular individualists, that we tend to privatize things. And but it's really interesting then that they also reside in universities and they study, like knowledge, facts. They try to find a common path.
Right.
That's what universities are for.
Sure.
So that also makes good grounds for talking about, these big questions. So with our events and the way we work, we try to lure out the Christians. And that's where you guys have been really important. And also, in fact, other American teams. Because I don't think... I don't think we could have gotten to the level with the events that we do without the people who actually wanted to do them. Because we actually depend on people wanting to participate and leading the way through example. But with the Christian, typical Christian students, we found actually in the survey in 2024 this year that there had been some development from 2019 when we did it last time. So they're hiding their faith a little bit less. So 85% now report that, Christian students hide their faith. But, that's an improvement from 91.
Sure.
We also see that, they read the Bible more. They also have a kind of vivid prayer life. They pray frequently. And they go to church. So, I mean, they're very sturdy. In many ways, they know where they belong. They are faithful in their churches. They do service. They're part of small groups. But still, we have this huge challenge when it comes to just being open about it and,
Yeah.
Right.
and moving towards the universities without fear.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are things happening among Christian students, and I don't use the word revival, although some people have been using that as of late.
Yeah.
Sure.
When it comes to what's happening, I think it's too early to say revival because things aren't happening to that degree. But there are movements, I would say, among young Christians in this secular country of Norway, which is really encouraging, and because I think a couple of generations have only seen the downfall of Christianity. I mean, they only think it can go one way. They have this progressive mindset where the secular worldview has to progress and the Christian one has to regress.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But we're seeing now that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
As for the non-Christian students, I mean, they're so diverse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we have so many. I think I shouldn't say a number probably.
Sure.
But there's so many thousand global students living here for a couple of semesters or more.
Yeah.
Who have they always have the international perspective. They never become Norwegians in the sense of living here and growing here and
Sure.
investing here. But you also have among Norwegian students immigrants who are deeply religious and who are perhaps more faithful to their religion.
Yeah.
Because they also belong to ethnic minorities that they identify really strongly with.
Yeah.
So you have an emerging minority of Muslims in campuses, and the interesting thing about the Muslims are that they are evangelization.
Yeah,
they're very
evangelization
evangelistic.
all over the
Yeah.
place. So they are boldly sharing
Right,
their
they are.
faith.
Yeah.
That I don't believe is true, but
Sure.
they also set an example for openness when it comes to religious questions or
Right.
matters.
Yeah.
But then you have, I mean, I would describe the typical students as the secular individualists who are perhaps open to there being something more, something bigger, and even desiring it. They've found, most students have found that, they are longing for some sort of big story to be part of. Most of them would find it in finding their education, a family, building a home. I think that middle class dream would be kind of like that's the meaning of life to a lot of people. But then again, many of them have realized that, but can this be all? Because their families are broken.
Right. Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
the work market is pretty good in Norway, but the belief in a good future is declining. So people don't believe anymore. I think that's similar to many other Western countries. That the future will be better than the past.
Yeah.
So their hopes for the future are they're losing it. So what we're seeing, I think, more now than only 10 years ago is people who are looking for hope for the future. They're looking for true meaning because what their world has been all about, they've found not to be meaningful because it's broken.
Yeah.
Right.
But also in our surveys, I mean, the statistics show that they are really skeptical to established religion, to dogmas. They are really, really negative when it comes to the Christian religion, particularly, because it's been the dominant faith in this country for so long, and it's what we're progressing from.
Right.
So myths like faith and science can't go together are really well established.
Yeah.
So people actually, I mean, that's the number one reason why people say they're not Christians still. It's because they don't think it goes together with,
I've had that talk with Norwegian students dozens of times. We've moved past that. We do science now.
Yeah.
It's okay. What is science? Because I'm still a Christian. What is it about science that challenges my beliefs? Like, why should I change them? And they have no idea. There's a, like you said, a myth. It's just something that everybody knows, but nobody has ever questioned. Everybody knows that people were religious because they couldn't explain the world, and now science is doing that for us, and so we don't need these other explanations. I'm like, oh no, that's not what we're talking about. Like, that's not what's happening. And so far, when I just asked that that question. What is it about my Christian faith that you think I should stop believing because of the science?
Yeah.
Well, don't you guys believe things about like God made the world? I'm like, well, I mean, yeah. Yes, I do. And that's why, I really appreciate, I say gotten to know, I've spent a little bit of time in the presence of Professor Holm in UIO, University of Oslo, physics professor, who's such a bold champion of the faith. And he invited, John Lennox came to UIO and gave a talk, which ultimately was a gospel presentation.
Right.
But started as a presentation about AI.
Yeah.
And
I love that so
Professor
much.
Holm was the host and sort of and so I showed, so at that event I showed up to try and help because I thought it was a Laga event.
Yeah.
Because John Lennox was attached to another Laga event that was happening.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And the people there are like, what are you doing? This isn't, who's Laga? I'm like, oh, shoot, okay, I didn't realize.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was like a UIO physics department event
I know.
because Sverre was on it.
Yeah.
And he's such a public, wonderful, powerful, bold expositor, I guess, or example of Christian faith. And so that's really wonderful to see. And then I have the benefit of saying, well, there's this, I don't think I've ever called him my friend, but I could say, I have a friend who's a physics professor in the University of Oslo.
Sure.
You should go ask him about what the science has to say. Because, I'll leave that there. I started rambling. I shouldn't have started rambling.
Well, what's great about that is, how it normally comes out for me is it's like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen like this like sketch about a guy saying like men's brains and women's brains, right? And he says, and men's brains are like a bunch of boxes. So the boxes don't touch, and you don't mix the topics of the boxes together. When you open up a box, you only talk about what's in that box and nothing else. And so it feels like that when we open up the truth box in conversations with other people, people are like, well, that's cool. You've got your religion box somewhere else, and that's where you read your Bible and sing your songs and pray to your God. And if that's great, that's in that box. But when we're talking about truth, when we're talking about reality, what's true about the world, religion doesn't go in the box, right?
Religion is like,
that's kind of the attitude I've experienced.
Yeah, it seems to be something like a dietary preference.
Right.
It's like, listen, if you want to be a vegan, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I respect that for you. Or if you want to have an alternate diet, that's fine, as long as you're not hurting anybody, but that just isn't for me. So it's good for you. I'm glad you find meaning there. I'm glad it's good for your life. But I'm not really interested in doing the vegetarian thing or the vegan thing. And I was reading recently in a book, it was talking about that same idea, how people view religion as all one thing, and they juxtapose that against somebody having a heart attack. It's like if you had your doctor said, well, listen, there are a few ways we can go. Like here are our options. Like we can do nothing. We can cast your left leg. We can remove an eyeball, whatever. It gives you all those things. Nobody would say, well, yeah, those are all equally valid options. Just pick one of those, whichever one works for you. When it comes to heart attack, like the goal and the diagnosis and the treatment, like it matters. You got to pick the right one. But when it comes to, but that's not the category that people think about your faith life. When it comes to religious topics of eternal importance, what to do with your soul, that's more like, well, that's just a choice to be made. It's a preference to be expressed, not something that is important. Like your decision about this matters. That I think that's been more or less my experience. And then with this really interesting, lingering sense that Norwegians are Christians, and the way that comes out is like, well, sometimes it's just bold. I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in God. What do you mean you're a Christian? Well, I mean I was baptized, and we're Norwegians, and we're Christians. The Israelis are Jewish, and Saudi Arabians are Muslim, and Norwegians are Christian. But then it comes out in other subtle ways. Like I remember speaking with a young lady, in fact this was in Bergen, who she said, I'm not really religious, I don't believe in God, I don't think there's anything like that, but I really want to have a church wedding. I said, really? She goes, like a traditional religious church wedding. But she was very critical of Christianity just as a thing. But it was part of her identity was a church wedding that was somehow related to being Norwegian and Christian, but not believing in God.
Can you help us with that? Like understand it, Karl Johan. I'm looking at Karl Johan now. Like understand, because is that I have encountered that a lot, right? Like people being okay, calling themselves Christian and expressing the same kind of attitude that Cameron is talking about. do we experience that kind of among students? Are those students in the category of Christian students you were talking about earlier, or are they more a part of the broader kind of attitude of Norwegians towards Christianity in general? Like, yes, I'm a Christian because I'm Norwegian, because I was baptized in the church. No, I don't believe in God, but I'm a Christian because of those other things. I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the general belief in God, according to a research called Norwegian Monitor, it's been declining from early 80s until 4 years ago. But this year, for the first time, it went up. And so I mean, generally, people would believe in some sort of, I mean, now again, not a majority of Norwegians were atheists on the last research, and this time they're not. So I think this general belief in a God, it's there, but definitely belonging to the state church or belonging to the Norwegian church. That's part of the story that is not again related necessarily to the philosophy of it or belief behind it, but it's a tradition. It says something about who we are.
Yeah,
and when you've been part of a rather small country like Norway, with only, I guess now 5.5 million population, it's just a little bit of California. And we've existed in this country, homogenic culture for almost 1,000 years with Christianity now, since it become a public religion. It has really shaped us collectively. And I think, that collective mentality is still really strong with Norwegians, although we're losing it. It's still very strong. And it also makes us regulate our life according to it. So we are actually, according to another research about the strictness of culture, how strict are you with each other to follow certain rules, And they're not written rules; they're more like norms. Norway was one of the strictest countries in the world when it came to this is what you do. So you baptize your kids in church when you live in that part of the country. You do Christian confirmation because that's what you do. So you self-regulate according to the expectations of the group. And I think that lives really strongly with Norwegians and even more in the countryside than it does in the cities.
Yeah, interesting. So of course we spend most of our time in the city, but I've noticed that this interesting thing that I don't quite understand and can't explain yet, but it seems to be like Norwegian people in general would never tell anyone what to do, but everyone knows what to do and does it and expects others to do the same.
And you better not do it different, right?
Yeah. Well, and the times that it comes out are really the unspoken thing underneath it is like, well, this is the way you're supposed to do things, and it's the Norwegian way, so it's the best way. So we got here and we took our youngest kid to barnehage, to kindergarten, and she was young enough that she was taking naps. So they put her in the stroller and they put her outside for nap time. Everyone else in the world thinks that's crazy. That's crazy town. Nobody does that. And I love telling people about it because they go, no, that's not true. I go, yeah. So
how cold was it?
Oh, well, as long as it was above, I think -15 or something. But there wasn't a single day. Yeah, Celsius. Yeah, there wasn't a single day that she didn't take a nap outside. But when we ask, why do you do that? And they're like, well, don't you know? Like this is the best. This is how we do it. So it's
you guys
the best
don't do
way
that
to
in
do
California?
And why not? You'd be so much better if you were more like us in that way. And it's never been offensive. So that's the thing where it's all at once. Norwegian people seem to be not self-assertive or pushy or dominant. It seems like the people here are meek and receptive and humble. Maybe sometimes even to a fault, or. Maybe I shouldn't say it that way because it's mostly really beautiful. But at the same time, I think that makes sense of how you explained it. It's like, no, there's social expectations and pressure to conform socially. And I think the way I put that was, it's like everybody knows what to do and does it and expects other people to do it.
Yeah, and speaking about kindergarten, I mean, actually going to kindergarten would be one of those social norms.
Yeah, I read that when we took our social studies test, it was like 95% of Norwegian kids. Yeah. And kindergarten here is like more like preschool in the United States. It is voluntary and it goes till age 5. And then when you turn 6, you go to first grade, which is part of compulsory education. But yeah, most Norwegian kids are in.
But that is politically driven, so that's a new trend. I mean,
Okay.
it's part of political ideology. And when I grew up, for instance, most kids were at home.
Huh.
So that's how fast that
Yeah.
change has happened. But
Interesting.
now it's just expected.
Yeah.
And you know, I think another good example of, because I think what the Norwegian population as a overall lacks when it comes to this strictness of rules is we lack the resilience on an individual level when it comes to changes that we don't like.
Oh.
So how do the Norwegians stand up against the kind of society that is now taking form? Because it looks more like in a post-Christian society than the one we had only when I grew up, when we sang psalms in the public schools.
Yeah, sure.
And you know there was prayers from our teachers in public schools. So what will happen now? What will the resilience look like now that culture is changing really fast? I think that's a crucial question also for church and for Christian students.
Yeah.
And when they're no longer accepted as part of the norm, how will they face that challenge? Because it's a massive challenge.
For
Someone who grew up with, I identify with the masses. That's my identity.
Right.
Well, so the girls, they go to a public school here in Oslo, and I remember when Christmas time came around, I was shocked. Shocked isn't the word. Surprised that they sung Christian Christmas songs as a class. And then when it came time to have their Christmas concert, they did it in the local church. And I thought, okay, that's really beautiful. Not because necessarily I think that that we should be blending the church and the state. I don't love that. But the idea that there wasn't that same kind of fear, like just hearing about that, we're going to have our Christmas thing in the local church. My American reaction is like, "You're what? That's allowed? Can you do that? Isn't somebody going to get mad or fired or something?"
Right.
But the attitude even now was something like, "Well, no, that's what we do.
Yeah.
We sing these songs about Christmas. It includes Jesus, and if you don't want to participate, you're welcome not to." And it's all at once sort of no pressure, but that's just what we're Norwegian. This is what we do. Yeah. And there's something still lovely about that. And I think not necessarily in terms of Christian influence on school, because I wish there was legitimate gospel influence on these kids and in their classrooms, because they're not learning the gospel and they're not, in a sense, being Christianized, but that there was still a part of a cultural identity that said, no, we're Norwegians, and in Norway, this is what our culture does. And we're still going to participate instead of just dilute or dismiss or get rid of it.
Yeah, and I like it that they receive knowledge about at least artifacts of the Christian faith.
Yeah.
Or ceremonies belonging to the Christian faith. So I mean that's valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it doesn't generate, like you say, it doesn't generate like gospel conviction.
Right. Sure.
Yeah, that's something different.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you, put you on the spot maybe, because you asked a question a second ago. We were like, well, how do we respond to the challenge? When the cultural climate is moving a certain direction, so-called progressing away from Christian beliefs. I'll ask you what you think. How do we respond to that? What do you think Christian students or Christian missionaries or Norwegian Christians, what should we do to respond to that?
Well, I think, first of all, there has to be a major shift in the Christian institutions' way of responding to it, because we were once, not very long ago, the most missionary sending country per capita.
Yeah.
Right.
So we had a time of extreme growth when it came to Christian institutions, churches, organizations, educational institutions that were built and founded on gospel-centered truths.
Yeah.
And they were aimed towards it. That was their purpose. That was why they existed, to live out and to share the gospel. So now we still have a lot of these institutions, but many of them have become more secular. And some of them are struggling financially because they don't have any donors and their volunteers are dying.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have to realize that a lot of what we had, we're going to have to lose. And I think for a lot of those who have grown up in Christian, prayer houses or churches and have good memories with those, they can't afford to be sentimental about those memories. Yeah. A lot of what we've had in this country, we're going to lose. But I think, the proper response is is starting praying, worshiping. It is losing some of the ideas that you had of what church was going to be like.
Right.
And I think pretty fast most Christians in Norway are going to have to do that. And we either, I mean, we can tend to go in two trenches. One of them being hiding out, like the turtle, you know, like become a turtle church. You stick your neck out from time to time when you have to go to work or to the grocery store or whatever, but then you hide, you go back into your shell, and you hide your faith there, and that's the kind of Christian you are, and that's the kind of church you are. I mean, so the turtle church, they can remain pure in their faith, they can have their conservative values and believe the right thing about the Bible and use big words when they're in church, but essentially they hide and they don't follow Christ because they don't do the thing that Christ commanded us to do, you know, go out and make disciples.
Right, exactly.
That's complete opposite. Now the other trench, of course, is being a chameleon. You just always blend in with the cultural narrative and when we fit best. So I think the response to this challenge is to finding that middle way.
Right, exactly.
Where we are in a community of believers that is not, you know, it's not built for us. It's not a market-based mentality behind
exactly.
it doesn't suit my needs. It's a community of believers because it's family and everyone worships Christ as Lord, you know, and that's what we got in common. But besides that, you might not have anything in common, and that's fine.
And those are the fine. It's beautiful. Like that's a picture of eternity.
That was true. It was true about the first Christians.
We've said
in a lot of
things like
ways.
that before. Like the beautiful thing about the church is people who would never relate to each other otherwise.
I love the letter of Philemon, you know, like a slave owner and a slave, you know, that's the kind of conflict they had.
Right.
Our conflicts are minor. So, I mean, we have to start being part of a kind of a church that resembles the church of, you know, Acts. And that church challenges us far beyond the consumerist mentality church, where you get your consumeristic needs met. And the second part, of course, is we need to share the gospel in the marketplace. And I love there's a great theologian and thinker in Britain called John Stott. He's dead now, but you know he coined this phrase like the word and the world. We need to both read the newspapers and we need to follow up on what happens in culture to stay tuned in, but we need to stay rooted in the word. You know, that's word first. Like,
Imagine that.
Hey, I have an idea. Anyways.
Nice. So if we can stop have these consumeristic expectations toward what church is meant to be, start living, you know, like the discipleship life through the community that Christ created for us to live in. And if we can tune into the culture and be part of it in the sense that we are part of people's everyday life and through that knowledge having actual good news to share with them, because if we only have, you know, communities that resembles what they see elsewhere, just, you know, poorer or or not as attractive or not as inclusive or whatever, then people will never be attracted to church. But if church is something completely different than what people see elsewhere, I think they will be enticed by it. Won't they? I mean,
I think so. I mean, so for whatever my perspective is worth, I've been here for a few years, and so I always try and lean on the perspective of other Norwegians. But I remember it was like the first week I got here. We were having dinner with Benta, the pastor at Home Church. And
she's awesome.
Oh, yeah. Benta's amazing. We were having dinner with her, and I just asked her a very similar question. I was like, why are churches out here struggling? And by struggling, I mean like, well, attendance is waning off, doing more and more funerals, not so much weddings. And, you know, so what's going on? Why our church is not succeeding out here? And what she told me is like, well, the exact words she used were, churches fail because they refuse to change, not get with the times and change their views. They don't, not by straying from the word, but because I loved what you said. Like, it's a Christian community, Christian church built for us, basically. Like, it looks I'm putting up air quotes, too Christian in the sense that it's really foreign to the outside world.
Yeah.
The barrier to entry is really high. And it's like, oh my gosh, what am I walking into? This feels like a cult. This feels too weird.
Yeah.
And there are more things that are on the table that we can remove those areas of entry to than many Christians think. I think that that's so important. So it just makes me happy that your thoughts were very similar to that.
And that reflects the similar challenges that the church in the United States is having too. So Jacob and I both come out of the sort of mega church movement that happened for maybe 30 years or so, and now it's struggling, and there are a number of reasons for that. And some of that, I think, is some of those reasons are cultural. The culture is changing, and the sort of the bigger your organization gets, the more inertia it has. It takes a longer time to turn, and I think Christians, for some reason, we as a group for all time seem to have. We seem to slip into this temptation where it's like, no, we do things this way because this is the way things are done, and we fail to look outside and see who our world is. And so we prioritize, I think, sometimes it's not to say that we do the wrong things, but we put our priorities in the wrong places. And then there's a question about, well, if we change what we're doing, then are we being faithless? And it's like, well, no, we hang on, we keep the gospel, and we keep God's word, and we keep sound doctrine. We hold on to those things. Those are highly important, but everything else is negotiable. But I think just like, how many times did God have to tell his people to stop worshiping idols?
3 times.
3 times, yeah.
That's it.
Then they got
3
it.
times like a day. But
But we worship our programs and our rituals and the way that we do things, and then just like any organization that changes, it's like, well, you see that there's less and less participation. It seems like your people are slipping away and you're dying. You're like, but I can't change now because then I'll lose the rest of what we still got. We'll lose the last few. Yeah. And I remember I was at a church planting conference several years ago before we moved here, and that's what it was exponential. Do you know the exponential guys? Yeah. It was exponential, and they were talking about how the future of the church is. They called it micro bivo, micro churches with bivocational leadership.
Right.
It's like this thing where we have these big, call them corporate church structures, where we have a paid staff and a big organization that can build a big building and attract a lot of people. Just going away. The millennials and younger aren't giving to the church like the boomers did. Church giving is going to be 80% less in the next 15 years. And there's also disillusionment with the fact that the church is seen as an institution. And that's true in America, where we've never had a Church of the United States.
Right, exactly.
And there was never a Christian church that was a part of our national identity. Never mind for 1,000 years. I think the Church of Norway was established in the 930s AD. It's been around a minute, right? It's older than the rocks in California.
Yeah, exactly. Some of them. I love that.
I think that was in service saying, I think that the idea that the church is a community first and primarily, and that we have a mission and a commission from Jesus himself to go out and make disciples. I think, therefore, it makes it incumbent upon us to put the first things first and not worship any of the other stuff. No sacred cows. Yeah. We don't worship. We worship Jesus, and everything else is negotiable.
Yeah.
And then what attracts people is the stuff that we really need. Maybe it's not the programs. The programs just don't interest the culture anymore. I can have more fun on my phone than youth group on Wednesday night. So there's no reason for me to leave my room. So the programming has to change. But I think we as a church, because Jesus has given us access to like the treasures of heaven that people really need. Like Jesus said, "I'm the bread of life." It's like we have the bread of life, Christian brothers and sisters, that people need to not die. And I think if we keep that in the front of our mission, recognize that's the treasure that God's given us, then what attracts people is they're attracted to the sustenance they need to live, the bread of life, the living water, etc. I wonder why Jesus kept using those kinds of metaphors, because that's really satisfying. And then we don't have to be so concerned with or preoccupied by, well, how do we adjust our programming? Well, how do we change our music? Because what's the music that the kids are listening to now? And then we do sort of a bad version. There's very, very good Christian music, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's like 20 years late and not quite as good. You know,
I would love to see Christians shaping the cultural music,
Yeah.
right? Shaping the cultural arts.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah,
seems
like they did for 1,000
we almost
years.
abolished the humanities and arts from churches.
Yeah.
But remember the cathedrals in Europe.
Right.
Remember how the church has been a place for establishing and building and developing and creating. It's been so progressive in the sense of being creative and working towards leaning in towards something bigger.
Right.
Yeah.
So I also have, when we're talking about these institutions, I have a perspective of being a leader of an organization,
Right.
Lage, and I've thought about this. Where should we set our aims when it comes to student missions? Because we have about 50 paid staff, and we do central fundraising. But I also see those trends. Young people aren't giving to the degree that they did before, so it'll be interesting to see where we go. But I also see when I've, like me, I invested almost 10 years in building this organization. I could so easily become of a mentality where I want to preserve it.
Right, of course.
Yeah,
because look at all the good that it's doing and how important it is.
So much good, but it's necessary for someone like me in that position, like it is for everyone with the things that they are investing in and building into, to say that this can die if it's for the greater good. We should let this die if it stands in the way of the gospel being shared in a more effective way in our time. So I think we all have things that we've invested into, and I think that's great because God creates us to create.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
It needs to be for His purpose, and it needs to be for His glory. And I think the default mode of humanity is to doing it for our own. So I mean, I think to learning the arts of repentance, confessing sins. I think that's one of perhaps the movements we're seeing now with young people. I've seen it especially with Kristnerus, these graduates from high school, that the last 3 or 4 years repenting and really confessing to sins, going down on their knees, literally, and in small communities together. Ask God for forgiveness and starting afresh. I think this is a trend that I've seen as of late, and that really encourages me. Yeah, because it's a response to the cheap grace gospel, right? That has been preached in consumeristic church for so long, right? And I think perhaps the core of Christian students will still be smaller in the future. I don't know, but. What we're seeing among a lot of them are things that I really find as biblical. They really resemble the way church looked like when you read about it. So, just reflection.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. We're gonna have to wrap up for today, actually, which is so sad because it felt like it flew by for me. I hope it felt like it flew by for you guys listening. But thank you so much for being here, Karl Johan.
Thank you for having me.
And actually, I'll tell you right now, we'll go ahead and find another excuse to do this again. Absolutely, we'll find another reason to have you on.
We'll come to your house and hear all those
That's
boys
right.
in the background.
I learned more about California and reflecting on my time when I lived there. Because I have to say hi. Good to see you guys again on the podcast.
That's right.
I used to live where you guys live.
That's right.
Yes.
I remember Katrina, when we came over to your house, she's like, "Oh yeah, we'll make you some good tacos." When we lived in LA, we could not find good tacos. I was like,
oh my gosh,
girl! I was like, you don't even have to ask for one.
We use pineapple in our tacos.
Yeah. Dude, you walk into LA and are handed a taco, and it's not even like a bad taco. It's like the best taco you've ever eaten. And it's you.
We have, in fact, you guys should come. We have Taco Fredag once a month in our church community,
and we
make tortillas. We make proper sort of California Mexican style tacos. And our Norwegian friends who've come, I think they've developed a taste for it. But they're kind of like, okay, this is very different. Like, these are tacos. Like, yes, it's very
Where's
different.
the corn?
Yeah.
And there's no
Our
corn.
neighbor came once, and they had to bring a can of corn from upstairs.
You know what? I learned to love the fish tacos.
Dude,
right?
right?
My gosh,
they are really good.
We have got to do that for Taco Fredag one of these days.
Fish
Absolutely.
tacos, heck yeah.
All right. We got to wrap up.
We'll catch up offline.
We'll invite you to that later.
We'll be friends later. Right now, this is professional.
That's right. there's nothing else I could say to that. I think we should just end it here. We'll see you again next week. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Word First Radio. Be sure to like, subscribe, and check us out online at wordfirst.us. Yeah!